Hi, my name is Jonathan Russell Anelli. I'm a soil scientist at Cornell University, and I wanted to talk about pH today, and actually, more importantly, how we take pH. pH is an important feature of soils. It tells us a lot about nutrient status and some other indicators of soil that gives us a good idea about interpretations and how we might use the soil. But today what I want to do is focus on how we actually take pH, how we determine what the pH is of a soil. And there's a number of different ways. We're going to use the dye method today and talk to you a little bit about the Cornell pH test kits. pH test kits, there's basically two variants of them. And it has to do actually with the width of or the range of the pH that you're going to be using. We have a wide kit, and then we have sort of what we call a narrow kit. And the wide kit basically tests for pHs at the extremes, while the narrow kit basically runs from pHs of 5 to 7, sort of the neutral range. So let's open up one of these boxes so you can see what's inside it. When you open them up, you're going to have an indicator card. It's basically colorimetric codes for what the dye color is going to change to for its pH. You have a spot plate, and the spot plate is where you put your soil. And then you'll have two dyes. The two dyes that are in this kit are the bromolethiol blue, this dye right here, and the chlorophenol red, this dye here. So this dye goes with this color code, and this dye goes with this color code. Now how to do this, move these to the side. So you take a soil. Now this happens to be a Hudson soil. This is a fairly local soil to Ithaca in central New York in general. Okay, and what you're going to do is you're going to take just a nip of a little bit of the soil. You're going to fill that spot plate in, just two little spots, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to add not a lot of the dye. I tend to add about 2 drops, and I'm going to do this on the side, and hopefully you can see it. There's 1 drop and 2 drops, and you can see that from above. Okay, and then I'm going to do the chlorophenol, and I'm going to do 2 drops here as well. 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to let it sit for a little bit. Let the soil get moist. Now, the reason I don't use a lot of the dye is because the more dye you get in there, the less sensitive the dye is. Okay, so you want it to be moist enough that you can get some liquid off of the soil. You don't want it to be sponged into the soil. So you can notice on this one right over here, I'm not going to get any liquid off of that. So in that case, I'm just going to add 1 more drop. Okay, and it looks like it's doing the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to, on the chlorophenol, I'm going to add 1 more drop here as well. Just enough to wet it up, and so that I can get a meniscus on the side so that I can see it. Now, slide this to the side. Okay, you don't want to sort of stir this up and turn it into a slurry, because what's going to happen is all the sediment's going to get into the dye, and you're not really going to see the color of the dye. But if you look at that meniscus right there at the edge, that's the color that you want to look for. You do the same thing with the bromolethiol, but it looks like I've actually absorbed all the color into the soil, so I'm going to add another drop onto that one. Again, I want as little dye as possible. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the color to the indicator sheet. So this side right here is the chlorophenol side. I'm going to compare them up against each other. And you'll note that it's probably a pretty red. It's not a yellow or an orange, so it's probably at this end, which means it's in the 6 range, which is at the edge of its sensitivity. If you're at the edge of the sensitivity, you want to follow the dye color to the next range of colors. So you'll note that the bromolethiol goes from 6 to 7.2, while the chlorophenol goes from 5.2 to 6. So this, because it's at the 6th end, it's at the high end, I'm going to go to the next highest pH dye, and then I'm going to move it through here, and I'm going to see that it's someplace around 6.6. Now, because this is actually in the middle of the dye's range, this is probably pretty accurate as to its pH. If it was at 7.2, I would go to the next dye up. If it was at 6, I'd go back to the chlorophenol. Now, important point here, sometimes the dyes, and if you look at the chlorophenol right now, notice that this is at 6. If the bromolethiol, for whatever reason, it's not doing it in this case, was actually at this lower range around 6.62, that is a good indication that your pH is probably around a 6 or a 6.2. I wanted to show you one more soil. And I want to just sort of run through the pH testing one more time. But this is a kind of interesting soil. This is an Ontario soil. This is a soil that's a little bit farther north from us from here in Ithaca. So up in sort of in the lake, farther north of the lakes in the Finger Lakes of New York. And again, I'm going to do the pH test kit. I need this, and I'm going to need that just a little bit. Okay. Now I know something about this soil that you don't. And so I'm only going to use one dye here. Okay. A little bit more soil, I think, in this one. Okay, I'm going to use one dye here, and I'm going to use this dye, which is the bromothyle, bromothyle. And you notice that bromothyle goes from the range of 6 to 7.2. Okay, and I'm going to do this, put the bromothyle in there, 3 drops, this kind. Tap it out a little bit, let the color evolve. Run. Okay, so you see the meniscus there color. You compare it to, so it's someplace at this end. It's definitely not at this end. So it's up here on the high end, so 7.2. Now, if you remember what I said in the last video, I basically said that if you go to the edges of your range on the dye, you should always go to the next pH. Okay, and so that's where this wide range pH comes in. I'm going to open this up and pull out the dye. Right chip, okay. This range you'll see goes from 7 to 8.6, and it's a phenol red. So here's the phenol red, so you can see what the dye looks like. And we're gonna use that dye on this next spot plate. We're gonna see what the pH comes out as. 1 drop, 2 drops, a 3rd drop for luck, I guess. Give it a little tap. Okay. Now, you can see how bright red that is. Okay, here's our indicator. It's definitely not yellow. It's definitely not yellow. It's more on the redder end of the spectrum. Maybe someplace around in there. It might actually be up there. So looking around, it's not purple. So probably around an 8.2. It's in the middle of the range, so it probably is around an 8.2 on the pH. And I want to show you something, and I knew what was going to happen here, but I knew that this was a high pH soil. And the reason being is that this soil actually has calcium carbonate in it, a lot of calcium carbonate in it. And what I want to do is give you a little bit demonstration. Calcium carbonate, and I'm going to add a little bit of acid, and I want you to, guys, this is a little 10% solution of hydrochloric acid, and I want you to see what happens. See that bubbling? That's the acid reacting with the calcium carbonate to make carbon dioxide and basically venting off and bubbling. That is a good indication of why we want to know what the pH is.